Dawn breaks over the jungles of Guadalcanal on October 24, 1942. The air hangs thick with humidity and the acrid smell of cordite. Japanese Lieutenant General Harukichi Hyakutake stands in his forward command post, studying maps by the light of a kerosene lamp, his face drawn with exhaustion and something else, something that looks uncomfortably like fear. His radio operators work frantically, their voices rising in pitch as they translate incoming reports from the front lines. The words coming through make no sense. Companies vanishing, entire battalions shredded in minutes, not by superior numbers or tactical genius, but by something the Imperial Japanese Army had never encountered in China, never faced in Malaya, never imagined possible in modern warfare. The reports speak of a wall of fire so dense that men cannot advance through it, trees exploding into splinters, the earth itself seeming to boil under a storm of metal that never stops, never slows, never gives the attacker a moment to breathe or regroup or even understand what is killing them. One company commander's last transmission is barely coherent. They have turned the jungle into a furnace. We cannot move. We cannot see them. We cannot live. Then silence. U.S. Marine Corps After Action Report. October 1942. What Hyakutake does not yet fully comprehend, what none of the Japanese High Command has grasped, is that they have collided with an industrial philosophy so fundamentally different from their own that it might as well be alien. The Americans have not merely built more guns, they have reconceived what firepower means in modern war, transformed it from a tactical consideration into an overwhelming strategic reality, and equipped, even their lowest-level units with a volume of ammunition and rate of sustained fire that imperial doctrine considers logistically impossible and tactically unnecessary. The Pacific War in late 1942 represents a clash, not just of armies but of worldviews. The Japanese military, forged in the furnace of Manchuria and hardened by early victories from Pearl Harbor to Singapore, has built its doctrine around the warrior spirit, bushido, and the belief that superior morale, aggressive tactics, and willingness to die can overcome material disadvantages. Their infantry training emphasizes the bayonet charge, close combat, and the psychological shock of fanatical assault. Japanese soldiers are taught to conserve ammunition, to make every shot count, to rely on discipline and cold steel when bullets run low. This philosophy has worked brilliantly against the Chinese, whose armies lack industrial support, and against the British and Dutch colonial forces in Southeast Asia, who are undermanned and unprepared. The Americans bring something entirely different to the battlefield. They arrive in the Pacific with a military-industrial complex that has awakened from the slumber of peacetime, and now produces weapons and ammunition at a scale that strains belief. By late 1942, U.S. factories are manufacturing small arms ammunition at a rate approaching 10 million rounds per day. War Production Board Report, 1943. But production is only half the equation. The American military has built a logistics system, a supply chain spanning thousands of miles of ocean that can actually deliver this ammunition to the front lines in quantities sufficient to sustain unprecedented rates of fire. At the squad level, the contrast is stark. A typical Japanese infantry squad in 1942 carries perhaps 1,500 rounds of rifle ammunition total, distributed among 11 men. The squad's primary automatic weapon is often a light machine gun with limited ammunition supply, requiring careful fire discipline. Japanese doctrine expects these soldiers to make this ammunition last through extended engagements, relying on marksmanship and aggression to achieve victory. An American Marine rifle squad on Guadalcanal, by contrast, operates under entirely different assumptions. Each rifleman carries not just his basic load, but has immediate access to ammunition, resupply that Japanese planners would consider wasteful beyond measure. More critically, American squad structure revolves around the Browning automatic rifle, the BAR, weapon that transforms 8 men with Boltican rifles into a unit capable of sustained automatic fire. The BAR gunner carries 240 rounds in 12 magazines, but he is merely the tip of the spear. Behind him stands a logistics apparatus prepared to deliver thousands of additional rounds within hours, not days. Technical Manual TM 91275, 1942. But the true revelation comes at the company and battalion level, where American commanders deploy .30 caliber Browning M1917 water-cooled machine guns in numbers that Japanese officers find incomprehensible. These weapons, inherited from the First World War and refined through 2 decades of industrial improvement, are capable of sustained fire rates that turn defensive positions into killing zones. A single M1917, properly supplied with ammunition and water, can fire 450 rounds per minute for hours without mechanical failure. American companies deploy not 1 but 4 to 6 of these weapons, supported by ammunition bearers whose sole job is to keep the guns fed. U.S. Army Field Manual, FM 23-255, 1940. The Japanese discover this reality the hard way. In night after night of suicidal bonsai charges on Guadalcanal, they advance in waves, screaming war cries meant to terrify defenders and close the distance before superior firepower can take effect. The tactic has worked in China. It has worked in Malaya. On Guadalcanal, it becomes mass suicide. American machine gunners, positioned in overlapping fields of fire and supplied with ammunition by the crate, simply hold down their triggers and let mathematics do the killing. The jungle fills with the sound of Brownings, not the short bursts of fire discipline, but long, continuous roars that last 30 seconds, a minute, longer. Men fall in rows. The survivors push forward over their bodies and are cut down in turn. Those who somehow reach the American lines find themselves facing riflemen and bar gunners who have not expended their ammunition in the initial defense and who now have full magazines for slaughter. Japanese casualties in these night assaults defy traditional military logic. Companies attack with 200 men and return with 30. Battalions cease to exist as effective fighting forces after a single engagement. The Americans, by contrast, suffer casualties measured in dozens, not hundreds, because they have turned infantry combat into an industrial process. Load, aim, fire, reload, feed the belt, change the barrel, resume firing. The machine never stops. 1st Marine Division War Diary, October 1942, in Tokyo, where staff officers plot grand strategies for the Pacific Campaign. The reports from Guadalcanal initially seem like exaggerations or the excuses of defeated commanders. Surely the Americans cannot sustain such expenditure of ammunition. Surely their logistics will fail. Surely this is a temporary advantage, limited to a single island, an aberration that Japanese adaptability will overcome. But the reports keep coming, from Guadalcanal, then from New Guinea, then from across the Pacific, and slowly, with mounting horror, the Japanese High Command begins to realize they have entered a war where the old rules no longer apply. What they do not yet know is that American firepower superiority goes far deeper than machine guns and ammunition stockpiles, that the coming years will reveal advantages in artillery, in naval gunnery, in air support, and in the industrial capacity to sustain all of these simultaneously across a theater spanning thousands of miles. The lessons of Guadalcanal are merely the opening chapter. But by the time Japanese generals truly understand what they face, understanding will no longer matter. The secret buried in American firepower superiority is not a single weapon or tactical innovation. It is a philosophy born in the factories of Detroit, the arsenals of Springfield, and the minds of industrial engineers who understood that modern war would be won not by the bravest soldiers, but by the nation that could deliver the most metal to the point of contact. While Japanese war planners obsessed over pilot spirit and bayonet training, American military theorists were reading production charts and logistics studies, calculating tonnage and turnaround times, building a supply system that treated ammunition like a renewable resource rather than a precious commodity to be hoarded. Industrial Mobilization Plan, War Department, 1939. The transformation begins in 1940, when the United States is still technically at peace but already ramping up industrial production for Lend-Lease support to Britain. The Frankfurt Arsenal in Pennsylvania, the Lake City Army Ammunition Plant in Missouri, the St. Louis Ordnance Plant. These facilities expand from peacetime capacity to something unprecedented in military history. By 1942, American ammunition plants operate on 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The Lake City plant alone produces more than 4.5 million rounds of .306 ammunition every single day. War Production Board Industrial Facilities Survey, 1943. Workers, many of them women who have replaced men shipped overseas, tend the brass forming machines, the powder loading lines, the primer insertion apparatus. The process is so refined, so industrialized, that a single cartridge moves from raw, brass, to finished round in less than 30 minutes. But production means nothing without delivery. And here the Americans demonstrate an understanding of logistics that borders on the revolutionary. The U.S. Navy constructs specialized ammunition ships, the Nitro-class vessels, designed specifically for rapid loading and safe transport of explosives across the Pacific. These ships, coupled with a fleet of Liberty ships and purpose-built cargo vessels, create a supply pipeline that stretches from American ports to forward bases at Espiritu Santo, Numia, and eventually across the Central Pacific. By late 1943, ammunition stockpiles on forward islands reach levels that Japanese intelligence officers, reading captured documents, initially dismiss as American propaganda. One report estimates that U.S. forces on New Georgia have sufficient small arms ammunition for 6 months of continuous combat operations without resupply. Bureau of Ordnance Report, Naval Ammunition Logistics, 1944. The Japanese response to this firepower disparity is first disbelief, then desperation, finally a kind of fatalistic acceptance. Colonel Masanobu Tsuji, an influential staff officer who witnesses multiple Pacific engagements, writes in his diary, "The Americans do not fight like soldiers. They fight like factory workers, pulling levers and pressing buttons, letting machines do the killing while they stand behind walls of steel and fire. There is no honor in this, but there is terrible effectiveness." Dramatized composite from multiple Japanese officer accounts, the comment captures a fundamental truth: American tactics deliberately minimize individual heroism in favor of systematic application of firepower. Squad leaders are trained not to inspire glorious charges, but to coordinate fields of fire, to ensure ammunition resupply, to call for artillery and air support at the first sign of enemy concentrations. The Battle of Bougainville, in November 1943, demonstrates this philosophy with clinical precision. Japanese forces, attempting to repel the American landing at Cape Tarawa, launch a major counterattack on November 7. The assault involves elements of the 23rd Infantry Regiment, approximately 475 men, attacking across a narrow front toward American positions held by the 3rd Marine Division. Japanese commanders expect their aggressive night assault to overrun American lines through shock and close combat. The tactics that have occasionally succeeded on Guadalcanal when they achieved surprise. Instead, they encounter what American after-action reports describe as coordinated defensive fire of unprecedented density. 3rd Marine Division G3 report, November 1943. The Marines, forewarned by coastal watchers and radar-equipped destroyers offshore, are not surprised. They have positioned interlocking machine gun positions every 30 yards along the defensive line. Behind the machine guns, riflemen and bar gunners wait in carefully prepared foxholes. Further back, 81mm mortar have pre-plotted firing coordinates for likely approach routes. Offshore, destroyers stand ready with searchlights and 5-inch guns. The Japanese attack begins at 0130 hours. Within seconds, the jungle erupts in light and sound. Marine machine gunners open fire simultaneously, their tracers creating visible cones of death that intersect and overlap. The bar gunners add their fire, targeting any movement in the spaces between machine gun-beaten zones. Mortar crews drop high explosive rounds on suspected assembly areas behind the Japanese assault line. The destroyers offshore switch on their searchlights, illuminating the battlefield in harsh white light, then begin firing their 5-inch guns at targets marked by Marine forward observers. The noise is so intense that participants later report being unable to hear individual weapons, only a continuous, overwhelming roar that seems to come from everywhere at once. The Japanese attack dissolves in less than 20 minutes. Those who survive the initial contact attempt to withdraw, only to be caught by pursuing fire as they retreat. Dawn reveals 395 Japanese bodies in front of the Marine positions. American casualties, 12 dead, 23 wounded. U.S. Marine Corps Historical Division, Bougainville Campaign Analysis, 1944. The kill ratio more than 30-1 reflects, not superior courage or training, but superior firepower applied through superior logistics. The Marines expend an estimated 85,000 rounds of small arms ammunition during the engagement, along with 1,200 mortar rounds and 400 5-inch naval shells. Within 48 hours, all expended ammunition is replaced from stockpiles, and the Marines are ready to repeat the performance if necessary. For Japanese commanders reviewing the battle reports, the mathematics are devastating. Their soldiers are not cowards. They are not poorly trained. They attack with the same determination that won victories across Asia. But determination cannot overcome a 20-fold disadvantage in sustained firepower. A Japanese machine gun crew, conserving ammunition according to doctrine, might fire 500 rounds during a critical engagement. Their American counterparts fire 5,000 rounds and have 5,000 more waiting in reserve. The Japanese have brought swords to a gunfight, except the guns are actually sustained fire weapons backed by an industrial system that treats ammunition as infinite. The disparity extends beyond small arms to artillery, where American advantages become even more pronounced. By 1943, U.S. Army divisions in the Pacific deploy standardized artillery battalions, equipped with 105mm and 155mm howitzer, supported by fire direction centers using advanced mathematical calculations and communications equipment. A single American artillery battalion can deliver massed fires multiple batteries, firing simultaneously on a single target with a responsiveness that Japanese forces find inexplicable. Forward observers equipped with radio sets can call for fire missions and receive devastating barrages within minutes. Field Artillery School, Fort Sill, Fire Direction Center Manual, 1943. The Japanese artillery, by contrast, operates under severe constraints. Ammunition shortages force strict fire discipline. Lack of modern fire direction equipment means that massed fires are difficult to coordinate. Most critically, American air superiority and counter-battery radar make it suicidal for Japanese guns to fire more than a few rounds before displacing to avoid retaliatory strikes. Japanese gunners learn to fire and flee, accepting that sustained bombardments will draw immediate and overwhelming American response. One captured Japanese artillery officer tells his interrogators, "You Americans make fire come from the sky like rain. We can only make it come like carefully counted drops from a faucet. How can we win such a war?" Dramatized composite from a TIS interrogation reports, 1944. The psychological impact of this firepower disparity corrodes Japanese morale as the war progresses. Soldiers who survive American defensive fires describe not terror of death but a kind of helpless rage at the unfairness of it all. They have trained for years, mastered the rifle and bayonet, cultivated the warrior spirit, only to be killed by unseen enemies who simply hold down triggers and let industrial production do the fighting. Diary entries from Japanese soldiers recovered on Saipan and Peleliu reveal a recurring theme: exhaustion not from fighting but from enduring, from trying to advance against fire so heavy that movement itself becomes impossible, from watching comrades die not in combat but in one-sided massacres that offer no chance for valor or revenge. U.S. Army Intelligence Service, translations of captured documents, 1944 to 1945. What Japanese generals realize, too late to alter the war's trajectory, is that they have misunderstood the nature of industrial warfare. They built an army for 1905, for Port Arthur and decisive battles won by discipline and aggression. The Americans built an army for 1943, for attritional campaigns won by logistics and firepower. And in a war between these philosophies, courage becomes irrelevant. The only question remaining is how many more Japanese soldiers will die learning this lesson before their generals accept reality. The strategic consequences of American firepower superiority ripple outward from individual battles into the broader fabric of the Pacific War, transforming not just tactics but the fundamental calculus of military planning on both sides. By mid-1944, Japanese strategic doctrine has fractured under the weight of accumulated defeats, each one rooted in the same brutal mathematics. American units can sustain rates of fire that make defensive positions nearly impregnable and offensive operations devastatingly ones. The Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo faces a reality that no amount of warrior spirit can overcome. They are fighting an enemy that has industrialized, killing to a degree that makes traditional military virtues obsolete. Japanese monograph No. 45, Imperial General Headquarters Army High Command Record, U.S. Army Military History Institute. The American advance across the Pacific from 1943 onward becomes a systematic demonstration of firepower applied through logistics. Each island invasion follows a pattern refined through repetition. Overwhelming preliminary bombardment from naval guns and aircraft, Amphibious assaults supported by continuous fire from landing craft and destroyers positioned close to shore. Immediate establishment of ammunition dumps on the beachhead, and relentless pressure that never allows Japanese defenders time to regroup or counterattack effectively. On Tarawa in November 1943, despite the heavy casualties inflicted by Japanese defenders in prepared positions, American Marines ultimately prevailed through sheer weight of supporting fire naval guns. Artillery landed within hours of the initial assault, and close air support that pounds Japanese bunkers until they collapse. The Marines expend an estimated 2.5 million rounds of small arms ammunition, capturing an island measuring barely 2 square miles. V. Amphibious Corps After-Action Report, 2 December 1943. Japanese commanders adapt where they can, abandoning the banzai charges that proved suicidal on Guadalcanal in favor of defense in depth, elaborate fortifications, and attempts to draw American forces into close combat where superior firepower offers less advantage. On Peleliu in September 1944, Colonel Kunio Nakagawa implements a defensive strategy that avoids large-scale counterattacks and instead forces Americans to clear caves and fortified positions one by one. The battle becomes the costliest per square mile in Marine Corps history, with American casualties reaching nearly 40%. Yet even here, the outcome is never in doubt. American forces bring flamethrowers, demolition charges, tanks, artillery, and naval gunfire to bear on each defensive position. When one tactic fails, they try another, always backed by ammunition supplies that never run critically low. Japanese defenders fight with extraordinary courage and inflict heavy casualties, but they cannot kill Americans faster than American logistics can replace losses and American firepower can reduce fortifications. 1st Marine Division Action Report, Peleliu, October 1944. The psychological toll on Japanese forces intensifies as the war moves closer to the home islands. Intercepted communications and post-war interrogations reveal a military in the grip of despair, masked by fanatical rhetoric. Soldiers on bypassed islands, cut off from resupply and facing slow starvation, listen on captured radios to reports of American advances and understand that relief will never come. Those still in the fight know that each battle will follow the same script. American firepower will grind down defenses regardless of Japanese courage or tactical skill. A captured naval officer on Saipan tells his interrogators, "We knew we would die. That was acceptable. What was not acceptable was dying without being able to fight back, being killed by enemies we could barely see, buried under explosions we could not answer. Your nation fights without honor, but it fights to win." Dramatized composite from ATIS interrogation summaries. Saipan, July 1944. Behind the front lines, the Americans continue expanding their firepowered advantage through industrial innovation and logistical refinement. The introduction of the M1 Garand rifle as the standard infantry weapon gives American riflemen a sustained fire rate advantage over Japanese soldiers still armed with bolt-action Arisaka rifles. While a Japanese rifleman must work his bolt after each shot, the American simply pulls the trigger 8 times in rapid succession. In close combat, this difference is lethal. On Iwo Jima and Okinawa, where fighting often occurs at ranges measured in yards rather than hundreds of yards, American infantry, equipped with Garand's bars and Thompson submachine guns, dominate close-quarters engagements that Japanese doctrine assumed would favor their emphasis on aggressive assault. Ordnance Technical Committee Minutes, Small Arms Development, March 1945. Artillery support reaches levels that strain credulity. During the Battle of Okinawa, which rages from April to June 1945, American artillery battalions fire more than 2.8 million shells, not including naval gunfire or aerial bombardment. U.S. Army Forces, Middle Pacific, Okinawa, Campaign Statistical Summary, 1945. Japanese positions on the Shuri Line endure bombardments that last hours, sometimes days, with only brief pauses. Survivors describe landscapes transformed into moundscapes, where every tree is splintered, every structure collapsed, and the earth itself is churned into mud, mixed with human remains. American artillery officers coordinate fires with an efficiency born of advanced training and excellent communications, using techniques developed at Fort Sill and refined through 3 years of combat. Forward observers direct fires from positions, sometimes only hundreds of yards from the target, connected by radio to fire direction centers that can compute firing solutions and transmit orders to gun batteries in under 2 minutes. The human cost of this firepower superiority is asymmetric in the extreme. American casualties in the Pacific War are heavy by the standards of previous American conflicts, over 100,000 killed in action against Japan, but Japanese military deaths exceed 2 million. The ratio reflects not just tactical defeats, but the compounding effect of firepower applied continuously across 3 years of island warfare. Japanese soldiers die in numbers that would have forced any Western nation to seek armistice, yet the imperial government continues fighting, partly because acknowledging the hopelessness of the situation would require admitting that their entire military philosophy has been rendered obsolete by American industrial capacity. The engineers, technicians, and factory workers who enabled this firepower advantage remain largely invisible in contemporary accounts. Yet their contribution is decisive. Rosie the Riveter and her millions of counterparts in American war plants do not face enemy fire, but they win battles through their labor at the assembly lines. The men who maintain the ammunition ships, who drive the supply trucks, who operate the forklifts loading crates of cartridges onto landing craft, these unglamorous roles prove as vital as the infantry squads pulling triggers. A Marine machine gunner on Tarawa fires 1,500 rounds during the battle, but behind those 1,500 rounds stand the workers at Lake City Arsenal who manufactured them, the longshoremen who loaded them onto ships, the Navy personnel who transported them across 5,000 miles of ocean, the shore party that landed them on the beach, and the ammunition bearers who carried them forward under fire. American firepower is not a weapon, it is a system, and that system's foundation is industrial and logistical, not martial. War Production Board. Final Report on War Production Achievements. 1945. The legacy of American firepower doctrine in World War II extends far beyond 1945. The Korean War, Vietnam, the Gulf Wars all reflect the same fundamental American approach to combat. Use superior logistics to enable superior firepower. Minimize friendly casualties by maximizing enemy casualties through weight of fire rather than tactical brilliance. The doctrine has critics who argue it produces an American way of war that is wasteful, that fails against insurgencies that cannot be suppressed by firepower alone, that creates moral hazards by making killing too easy and too distant. These criticisms have merit, yet the doctrine persists because it achieves its primary objective. It wins conventional wars while minimizing American losses. For the Japanese military in 1945, understanding comes too late for anything but surrender. Emperor Hirohito's surrender broadcast on August 15 does not mention American firepower explicitly, but the subtext is clear in his reference to a new and most cruel bomb and the reality that continued resistance will lead only to the ultimate collapse and obliteration of the Japanese nation. Imperial Rescript on the termination of the war, August 14, 1945. The atomic bombs provide the final, ultimate expression of American firepower philosophy, the willingness to use any weapon, apply any level of force, to end the war on American terms. In the decades after the war, some Japanese veterans come to a grudging respect for American methods, recognizing that their own military leadership had failed to grasp the nature of modern industrial warfare. Others carry bitterness to their graves, convinced that they were not defeated by better soldiers but simply buried under mountains of ammunition that no amount of courage could overcome. Both perspectives contain truth. The American way of war in the Pacific was not elegant, not honorable in the traditional sense, not designed to test individual martial virtue. It was designed to win, and it succeeded through the unglamorous but devastating application of industrial power to military ends. The lesson